Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rule Number 3, the podcast committed to an asshole-free workplace. I'm your host, Eric Harkins, author of Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck. And if you've tuned in to Rule Number 3, you know that it's all about talking to leaders who share my passion for workplace culture, creating a performance culture for high performers, and making sure at the end of the day that Monday morning doesn't suck. And today, I have no doubt we're going to get into some awesome conversation. My guest today is Jaime Taets. She is the Chief Vision Officer, CEO, lots of different titles, but ultimately founder of Keystone Group International. You're a now two-time author as of yesterday officially with the new book launch. We're going to talk about that. You're a speaker, and you're really an advisor helping leaders and companies get the most out of their performance culture that they can. And we have so much to talk about. First, thank you for joining us on the podcast. We always have a good conversation. I know today's going to be no exception.
I'm so happy to be here, regardless of what we talk about. I just told you it's an open book. So let's do it.
Well, let's jump into it. So first, obviously, your new book, and I think officially yesterday was the launch date, The Culture Climb: How to Build a Work Culture that Maximizes Your Impact. And I know from personal experience, writing one book is hard enough. You've now written two. So lots to talk about inside of the book. But first of all, congratulations. And, you had a post, I think, the other day about how many hours you put into it and how many months. And so just congratulations.
When it went over 100, I just stopped counting because I actually didn't want to know.
Yeah. Well, it's a great book, and it's almost, I call it a workbook, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean, there's some pages that you can take away and you can copy and use with your teams, and I love your balance of your lessons learned and kind of the self-reflection that you really challenge people to do, and I think we all need to do more of that. So what I want to start with, because if people don't know Jaime, you should. If you're listening because you're listening to my podcast, check her out. She's local here in Minneapolis like I am, but she works everywhere with companies and no doubt can help you improve your company's performance. But I think the title is probably a reflection of what I think must have been an incredible life experience where you recently summited Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's statistics on how many people have actually ever done that. Maybe I'm curious, what was the inspiration? And then we're going to talk about some of the blogging that you did as a result of that experience, which obviously fed to some of the content in the book. But first of all, you're sitting on your couch. You're like, I think I'm gonna climb Mount Kilimanjaro. How does that even start?
So what's funny is this book title was picked out over like 2 years ago. Like I had it in my head when we started writing the book, and I had no idea I was going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro at that time. So it's really interesting how it kind of all just came together. I'm a hiker, but like the most I'd ever done is a big hike in Colorado, right? So this isn't like I'm close to the 7 summits. Like that's not my aspiration.
Right.
And I think it pertains to your book, and what you write about is really what happened to me is 2022. So I own a business, right? I had payroll to pay through COVID. Yeah. And 2020 and 2021 were some of our best years.
Yeah.
So while a lot of other CEOs and entrepreneurs were like, can I keep my business afloat? We were like, whoa, right? Like growth, and like, can we keep the wheels on the bus, right? Was our question.
Right.
And then 2022 hit. And as a leader, 2022 was my toughest year. Yeah. Now, business was still good. My personal life is great. But as a leader, I don't think I was the leader I wanted to be to make Monday mornings not suck, right? And I was in this growth point, and I made a lot of mistakes and some bad hires, right? And things that just happen. And I got to August, and it had like depleted me. And I just remember sitting there saying, I always knew something like this was on my list. I didn't know a lot about it, actually. So I started doing research. I didn't tell anyone. And I even talked to a guide group down there and really started talking to people that had done it and said, like, how bad is it? Like, what do I need to consider? I was considering going by myself at that point. So that's also another consideration to go to Tanzania as a woman by yourself. You've got to kind of figure a lot of that out.
Right.
And then I talked to enough people, and they were like, you can do this. Like, here's what it'll take. And I signed up before I told anybody, including my husband.
Wow.
Because I knew if I told anybody else, they'd say, why? You've got so many other things going on. And what I wanted inside myself, and what I told people that some people listening might understand, is just feel like I needed to be cracked open a little bit, needed to get back to the core of who I was.
Yeah.
What kind of had happened to me. And so I knew I wanted 2023 to be a different year. So I booked the trip for January of 2023.
Wow. Good for you. Well, congratulations. And, I can't imagine the opportunity to do a lot of self-reflection in that experience. And you blogged about it. You wrote about it. There's stuff from the book. If there's a different one you want to talk about, that's fine. But one of my favorite, you have kind of these 10, I'll call them lessons. I don't think you use that word, but 10 experiences that you kind of gained from this. And one that really jumped out to me was life doesn't wait for you. Simple concept, but tell us the inspiration for that.
Well, it's as simple as it sounds. And the blogs came out of my journaling. So I journaled every day on the mountain in the morning and at night. And so I had a lot of just content, right? From my time and my experiences kind of being in it. And so when I came back, I started writing these actually more for me. And then my team read a couple of them and they were like, we got to share these. Like maybe take some of the, I had to kind of tone it back, but they were really personal journals.
Right.
So life doesn't wait for you was this realization that I also during that time had some pretty big things happening in my life, like any of us, right? You have a death or you have something happen that kind of rocks your world and you go, wait a minute.
Right.
And so I started to realize that first off, on the mountain, nothing waits for you. The wind, it's never going to be a perfect condition. It's never going to be a perfect time. Right. On the summit night, it was 30 below zero and 40-mile-an-hour winds on the face of a mountain. Like there was nothing perfect about it.
Yeah.
But I did it.
Yeah. Well,
and it's that idea that being ready, and I think I've told you this before, being ready is a decision, not a feeling.
Yeah. I love
that. You're never gonna have a feeling that you want to climb a mountain.
Right.
Decision.
Right. Well, you did it.
Yeah, right. And we need to get off autopilot as leaders a lot. I think that was kind of my message.
Yeah. Well, and one of and maybe it's related to this, but one of my favorite quotes of yours, and if I think about the last, 20 conversations I've had with different leaders, this concept that you talk about of being stuck is a great place to be. Boy, I think we all need to forgive ourselves for being stuck, if that's the right word. But, talk to us about that, from your perspective and in your coaching, letting people realize it's okay to be stuck.
Yeah. Well, that was my first book that I wrote. I literally wrote a whole book about it because I had these exact same conversations you're having. And I realized all these stuck points in my career and my success, like no one really knew about them. They see the highlight reel of all the awards and the good things that are going on, which is awesome. But like there were there still are so many stuck points every day, every week. Right. And I wanted to normalize that. So thank you for bringing that up because I think there's a lot of people that are stuck right now. And I believe that feeling of stuck is your catalyst for change.
Yeah.
So when you feel that way, you're like, I don't want to stay here.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'd love your perspective on this because you have kids, I have kids, they're around the same ages. And I feel like there's a different level of pressure that we put on kids today of, having to figure out your career path in high school. It's like, well, we're in high school and you don't even have to figure it out when you're in college. Your
brain isn't even fully developed.
Right. And it's okay to feel kind of stuck. Right. And I think that's part of the, self-exploration that you talk about is just giving yourself the forgiveness of it's okay not to know.
And I think there's a lot with my kids specifically. So we have a saying that sit in the suck. And so when something sucky happens, because it does, right? You don't do well on that test. You have a friend, you have an issue with a friend, you break up in a relationship.
Right.
Instead of just saying, you're going to be fine. You're good. Like you're right. We try to validate that.
Right.
I just typically say this sucks.
Yeah.
Let me just sit in the suck with you for a little bit. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to do to move forward.
I like it.
I think as adults, sometimes we don't just let ourselves sit in the suck. Now, I don't mean wallow in it and be depressed and, never leave the house.
Right.
But sometimes you just got to feel the feelings. You've got to know it sucks. And then you've got to say, all right, I don't want to feel this anymore. So what am I going to do differently?
Yeah. And that makes me think of one of the questions I was going to ask you is, when you talk about yourself, some of your self-reflection, I loved your post about I valued what I achieved as my success. And it's not about that success. It's about transformation. I think that's kind of related to what you just said, right?
Right. Again, my whole career, it's been like, well, what can I achieve? And achieve isn't like the outward awards. It could be a revenue level in my business, right? It could be that first hire or whatever it is. And I was always about that next achievement.
Yeah.
And I've reached a point where I have an amazing team now, right? And my achievement is like, it's not the same as it was before. And I can't find the same validation in it. And I think as leaders, we get to certain points in our career where now we just need to be leaders instead of being doers.
Yeah.
And that's a big like loss of like, but what's my worth? And so I've now believed my worth is transformation.
Yeah.
Of myself, of my team. I want to change all of their lives, right? That's my goal. I want to change my clients' lives. And so making that shift in my head was this awareness of like, I don't have to keep striving, right? I'm looking for something different now.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And I'm assuming that's a big part of the coaching that you do with your leaders is, shifting that thinking, shifting that modeling. So I want to talk about the book, but before we talk, I'm going to pull some of my favorite parts of the book. Again, The Culture Climb with Jaime Taets. I think my absolute favorite quote that I've seen you post or that I've heard you say is, everything you want is on the other side of fear. I mean, I think we just talked about it with Mount Kilimanjaro or any experience, but boy, how do we help people believe that that's true and accept that and get energy from it instead of more fear, I guess.
Correct. And again, culture is a great example of this. Is a lot of organizations are fearful if they do our culture survey, what they're going to find.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a place to start. Let's talk about that, right? Why are we fearful?
Yeah.
Because there's a great quote, and I don't know who it's by, but I think about it every day, is we look at the obstacles in our journey as if they're in the way, but what if they are the way? Right? Instead
That's
of
great.
I talk a lot about muscle, right? Building muscle with our clients. And what if every obstacle, right? The fears, the things that pop up along that journey are building muscle for something else you need to do as a leader or as an organization. And so we can't step back from the fear. I also believe that as you step towards fear and you actually start moving towards it, it gets smaller and smaller. When you're standing from a long ways away, like the mountain, it's enormous.
Yeah.
And as I got closer and closer of day 5, you're like, well, that doesn't look so bad.
I can do this.
And it's still the same mountain, right? But I've gotten closer to it and some of my fear has subsided during that time. And so our goal always is to be the catalyst to just, we want you to take the next step, whatever that right next step is. It doesn't have to be the end perfect next step.
Right.
I think getting through fear is just taking action because action kills fear.
Yeah. And it's not a straight line, right? I mean, it's never going to be. Well, and one of the things you and I've talked about in the past is, you just mentioned it. I mean, I love it when a company says something to me, same thing of, oh, we know we need to do an employee engagement survey, but we're afraid to, do it. And it's like, well, then you already know what the answer is. Like, actually, I like to challenge just to be slightly provocative of if you think you even need to do an employee engagement survey, you already have your answer because you're trying to get validation, I think, of the things that you already know. But as a great segue, so the book, again, one more time, The Culture Climb, it's available now. Check it out. But chapter 5 is Culture is Your Job. And one of the things you talk about, which really stuck with me, I think we know you and I share a lot of the same philosophy, that you are your most powerful tool. And I think my dream is that culture just becomes one of the not things that, is expected to happen if you do it. It's something that's part of the business rhythm. And that's kind of what you talk about. But talk a little bit more about you are your most powerful tool. I mean, it's 100% true.
Right. We think of culture as when you really have mastered it, it's unconscious.
Yeah.
Right. It's the muscle that you're just like, oh, I do that every day. And I don't really think about it anymore. Just like any new skill that we're building as leaders. And so that's our goal, is to get a company. Now that takes time.
Sure.
Right. But the only way we get them there is if every leader in the organization understands that it's not some big event that we're going to do, some survey, they have to internalize it.
Right.
And that takes time. It's not HR's job. It's not some outside consultant's job to come in and fix. All we're doing is coming in and giving them the tools and the awareness of how they're thinking, acting, and interacting, which is how we describe culture and where it can be improved. And you're never done.
Yeah. Well, and I started smiling because you said something. This is not HR's job, right? Culture is not HR's job. And my biggest pit in my stomach moment when I'm doing coaching is when the HR organization is the only team in the company that has turnover as a goal or the survey as a goal. And you talk about it starts at the top. I like to use a little more crude description of fish rots from the head. But we're saying the same thing, that if your senior leadership team doesn't want a great culture, then you're not going to have a great culture. But conversely, if your senior leadership team wants one, and you talk about this in your book, it's right there. Go get it.
And it takes work. So we say you have to build it both ways too, right? Yeah. So you've got to have buy-in, because that's where the resources and the time and everything you need to make it happen. But culture is actually built bottom up. Because what a lot of organizations, what a lot of leaders believe is that they can control the culture. We can declare that this is our culture, right? And then it is. Right. That doesn't work that way, because if you think of your culture like a piece of fabric, right? A piece of fabric, every single thread is a person. Now, some threads might have a little more voice, a little more say than a frontline employee, right? Versus the CEO, but they're all part of the exact same culture. Yeah. And so it's also got to be built from the bottom up, because we believe culture is the individual's choice and the leader's choice. Yeah. So when we get a lot of leaders that reach out to us and they say, we have to do culture work. And it's actually why we wrote the book the way we did, because we wanted it to be something they could hand to other leaders in their organization and say, this is what I'm talking about. Sure. Because we have a lot of leaders that want this and they see. Yeah. But they don't know how to impact up, right? And across the organization. And what we tell them is just impact your. Yeah. Start there. Right. Because people will start paying attention.
Well, and you talk about in the book the 6 truths that bust common culture myths, right? And one of them is that culture is everyone's responsibility. And, I love it. Yes, I mean, I think it starts at the top, but I agree with you. It's bottom up as well, because, you've got this underperformer that you allow to show up every day. The leader's got all the energy in the world. The high performers are engaged, but that underperformer shows up day after day after day. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is there isn't any one person that's not responsible for helping the company create culture, right?
And that example that you give is one we see a lot. And it's why we built the model that we built with the 20 different aspects of culture, not just one, right? It's not the kegerator. I dreamed of one day having a keynote that says it's not the kegerator and the ping pong table.
Yeah, right? It's a good title for a book too.
It's right. It's not the fun stuff. It's a combination of all of them. But if I'm a high performer in your organization and you invest in me, right? I get development and training, and I know I'm a high performer, but we allow the low performers to hang out, and it creates fire drills for me every day. Yeah. How often am I going to stay at your organization long term? Probably not.
Yeah. And, one of my messages, it's yours too, is, you'll never create a culture high performers want to be a part of if they have to work with underperformers every day. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And you talk about, and you just mentioned it, unstructured benefits, right? It isn't kegerators. It isn't bring your dog to work. It isn't wearing shorts to work. Everyone's doing that now. Right. So it's everything you just talked about that are unstructured benefits. So I think that's great.
And it's having the conversation around what your team wants, because here's a perfect example. We had a client that spent $100,000 redoing their office to make it fun, right? Beer in the break room, all of these things. And it was cool for about a week. And then they got their next engagement survey results, and the results went down. And they were like, how is it possible? We just spent $100,000 on the office and our engagement scores went down. Right. Well, we came in and we were like, well, let's do some focus groups and talk to your employees about what they want. Yeah. And almost every person said, they didn't ask us. That was stupid. I just wanted an extra day of vacation. I didn't want you to go spend all this money on stuff. I don't want to hang out here at 4:30 with all of you. I work with you all day long.
Yeah. I don't want a boss that calls me 4 times on my one day off this week. Right. Correct. I don't want a boss that calls me in the middle of my daughter's rehearsal when I told her that, I was going to be at my daughter's rehearsal. And, it's so funny. I talk about it in my book too. I worked at a company that had the free Red Bull and the free pop, and in teams and organizations within the company where they had great leaders, it was great. Hey, free Red Bull, awesome. And in the teams that didn't have a great leader, they could care less, right? So
the return on investment of where you're already making investments probably isn't where you want it to be. Because of the other factors, right? They all really work well together. And so you've got to be aware of your lowest performers. You got to be aware of your lowest building blocks, right? In the culture model, to know that you're getting the most from your best.
Yeah. Well, and back to, something we were talking about earlier, just this, this pressure on, people starting their career. One of the things that you recently posted and talked about was, and it was actually an article from Hilton Hotels, where they talked about lateral as the new up. And I loved your, comments and additions to that of, also helping leaders understand not everyone wants to be promoted, and that's okay, right? If you don't want to be a VP because you're a director and you like being a director, how do you make sure that that person still feels like they have lots of opportunity to continue to grow? So I'd love to, in your coaching, is that a shift that you've seen recently of trying to help people understand it's not just about the people that want to be CEO, it's everyone in the organization?
We've been talking about this for a good 5 to 7 years with our clients. So that's why that article really resonated with me, is because the idea of, and when you look at the generational changes, right, you're seeing this, is the idea of you get to a certain point and there's only the only path up in the organization is through a management track. And that is why we're in the situation we're in with such a huge leadership gap in organizations, is because people who should not be leaders and actually aren't even passionate about leading others, it was their only way of promotion. Right. So we talk with our clients about a goalpost methodology, where a certain person gets to a certain level and they can go individual contributor, but really high value, right? Principal level, like those types of things. And then they have a manager track where I could have no direct reports and sit in an executive room with you, and we're peers. Yeah. Right. How do we rethink some of that and really put the people who truly do have a passion and skill set for leadership on that track, and stop making your best salesperson your sales manager because they suck at it?
Right. Yeah. And, you think about a manufacturing environment, right? Who becomes the supervisor, the person who was the best person on the line? They liked being the best person on the line. I don't want to lead people. I just want to, I love what I do. And you're right. They didn't ask for it, certainly, and they didn't even want it. So
I think we've got to break that concept. And we have tons of stories from clients where they've actually, I don't like the word demotion, but where they've told a leader, like, listen, we just want you to own this, right? Right. We're going to move this. And they're like, oh my God. Right.
Well, and I think that what you just said is so powerful of, it's shifting the thinking of, it's okay to want to do what you're doing for 10 years, 5 years, 8 years, right? And it's not a demo. Hey, as far as we're concerned, you're adding even more value in this role than, you probably could have done in the leadership role because of this, and this, or whatever it might be. So for people who may not know, Keystone and you, and, obviously you brought a couple of decades of experience in when you started your own firm with, large organizations, Cargill and MoneyGram. But, give us the elevator pitch on Keystone for people who may not be familiar with it.
Thank you. So Keystone is a boutique management consulting firm, is how we would be classified. But we really take a holistic approach. So we're strategists by nature, right? And by background. So we've helped with scalability and growth and how to help organizations do that. And so we get a lot of calls for strategy. But what we tell them is that when we look at strategy, we're looking at strategy from 3 legs of the stool, right? A really strong business strategy that's clear and also agile in this business environment, right? Because we've got to make sure it's not so locked and loaded that we can't adjust to what's happening in the market. We need leaders who are prepared and ready and have the skills to drive the change required to achieve our business strategy. And we need a culture that has a strong enough foundation to withstand the change. We look at all 3. And so, we have competitors, if you look at, in each of those buckets, but our model is very unique in that we're bringing in all of those aspects to strategy, leadership, and culture just into the work that we do. It's not separate statements of work and separate approaches.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious. So you've been running Keystone for about 10 years, coming up on 10 years. Is there one of the three that, is almost always the biggest blocker, or is there one, I know this is a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Is there
No,
one
it's not,
thing that's always a
actually.
theme? Okay. Yeah. Which
not.
one kind of sticks out in most companies?
So we talk about stop mowing dandelions, right? And the idea of dig to the root. So stop mowing the dandelion off. Let's go to the root, which is what we do for our clients. I believe people hire us to do that.
Right.
And the root, 90% of the time, is unprepared leaders or unskilled leaders that aren't. Number one, we have never invested in them, so it's not fair to them. We've asked them to do something they have no skill in.
Yeah.
And we have some of the wrong people in the wrong seats. It's always leadership. Right. Always.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to,
it's an easy answer.
I'm not going to argue with you. And I talk about the fact that more now than ever, I truly believe the only differentiator that a company has is who they allow to be a leader.
Right.
And it's really as simple as that.
The hopeful part of all of this is we have tons of leadership programs, obviously, right? Coaching, all of that. But in the last year, we've launched an emerging leader program that's fully structured, so we can kind of come into a company and just lay it down, have the nomination process, and these are non-manager leaders, so they don't yet have any direct reports.
Right.
And that is one of the number one things we are selling right now, because they're finally going, we need them prepared before we grow, because we're going to need to put them in that role where they have direct reports, and those emerging leaders need to build the skills before they're leaders. Yeah. And so it's hopeful to me that we're getting a lot of traction on that, and companies are going, I get it now. You can't just wait till they've been in the role for 5 years to train them.
Well, one of my favorite quotes, it's JFK, but it's the best time to fix the roof is while the sun is shining.
Yes.
And it's, if we can help, if one person hears this and calls you because they're getting ahead of it, because when you're fixing your leadership issues because you have to, it's too late. Right. Correct. Or you did the employee engagement survey and it went down after you spent $100,000, remodeling the office or whatever it might be. So,
and here's the message for leaders that are listening going, yeah, well, maybe you actually don't know when it's too late, because from your vantage point, you're not seeing what's actually happening. So what I mean by is there's studies that prove that the average employee gives us 40% of what they're capable of every day. And this isn't because the employee is coming in and saying, I'm going to stick it to these guys today.
Right.
This is the employee not using their strengths, not leveraging their natural abilities, right? I'm a really great process person and I'm stuck in this job and not using that at all, because leaders aren't having those discussions and we're not digging deep. So when you talk about business results, I literally joke in my Keystone or my keynote, I'm not really joking, is that's like coming in and burning a pile of cash every day. No leader would do that.
Right.
But that's what's happening in our organizations because we're not tapping into that. Yeah. And that is a skill we have to teach leaders.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, it's so, one of the things I like about your messaging is, the simplicity of, these concepts aren't hard, right? Let's not overcomplicate this. These are the things that, and don't you find that most times, like, if you really asked a CEO, hey, who are your best leaders that are going to help you create culture? If they're honest, they know which ones are and which ones aren't. They can feel it. And I always tell a leader, if you don't know, ask your high performers, because they'll tell you, because they know, I promise.
Very good point.
So June 4th, and I didn't even know this was a day, but June 4th was Audacity to Hope Day. And you had made a post about it. And, I share quotes from people like, it's never too late to be what you might have been. And just some of these like, hey, it really is never too late. But I'd love to hear, what inspires you about this idea of audacity to hope.
Yeah. Well, it's really what my platform and my brand, right, is and what I want it to be. And I talk about this a lot is over my success, just like you get to a certain point where you now have a platform. Yeah. Meaning people are listening to you, whether they should or not, right? That's up to them, but they're listening to you. And there is a responsibility that comes with that. Yeah. And so for me, with my platform, I have an option every day with what I post, what I decide to put out in the world, how I interact, right, with the people I meet with, is I have an option to either put light or dark. into the world. That's how I look at it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so the audacity to hope is even in the darkest point, right? There's something that we can turn to, right? There's something we can have faith in, even when I am full of fear.
Yeah.
My moment is always like, is there one small thing I can find faith in?
Yeah.
Because that diminishes the fear, right? They talk about the little candle in a dark room, right? Can do a lot for that room. And so that's the audacity to hope, like the audacity in the face of a lot of crap going on socially. Right? A lot of crap going on just economically and everything that can really weigh us down.
Yeah.
I think leaders' job is to create hope.
Right.
In the midst of all of that.
I don't know if there's a better way to maybe start to bring this to a close. I think that's a super powerful message. One question I love to ask everyone. Mm-hmm. So my daughter graduated from college a little over a year ago. She's, a year into her career. My son is in college. He'll be starting his career soon. They're 23 and 20. If they called you and said, hey, my dad said, give you a call because, you had one piece of advice for me. What would that piece of advice for somebody who's at that stage of their career be?
This is like asking me to choose my favorite kid. I have so many that come to mind. And I would hand them a copy of my first book, by the way. It's big in the college scene, actually, right now because of my kids.
And let's plug your first book. You Are Here. Also by Jaime Taets, but yes.
Kick-ass inspiration for navigating your journey to success. And the whole idea is it's your journey, right? Stop comparing to everybody else, but like own it. Right. And so that's part of the advice. But I think you talked about the choices they're making at 18 and I would tell them you always have the power of choice.
Yeah.
No one can take that from you.
Right.
But just because you got an accounting degree and you get 4 years through it and you're like, I just realized I hate accounting.
Right.
Okay. Make a different choice, right? Or decide what that means. And you can, I feel like we stay stuck in these places and we don't have to be.
Yeah. Well, I was having this conversation with my son about just, degree and what area of focus. And I said, well, here's the good news. Our primary business at GKG is search. So I talk to executives 5, 6, 7 times a day, every day. And I said, in the last 5 years, I've never once looked at a resume and said, oh, wait a second, you're the SVP of operations, but your degree was in speech communication. Our right journey, now, it's not that straight line.
I could not tell you
what
college anyone of my employees went to or what degree they got. Right now, if you ask me, I have no idea.
And it doesn't even matter if you go to college, right? I mean, pick a path that you're passionate about. But it doesn't, the path you pick at 25 probably isn't where you're going to be when you're 50.
100%.
And if it is, you're really the exception. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And so let's say I decide to move across the country at 22 to take a job. Great.
Yeah.
Then you can make a different choice later.
Right.
But it's this like trepidation of like, I have to have it all figured out. What's the right next step is all you need to know.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's always, the fact that you're talking about it, I'm talking about it, we talk about it with dozens of people in our coaching. If there's somebody out there that's feeling like, God, everyone else has it figured out and I don't, it's like, no, everybody is having these same questions at 20, 30, 40, and 50. And, even at 50, I'm like, I don't know what the next couple of years are going to look like, but I'm kind of excited to figure it out. So,
and as long as I stay true to my values and what is right for me, then it can't be wrong. It just might be misguided every now and then, and you got to get it back on track.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Always a fun conversation. Jaime Taets, Chief Vision Officer at Keystone Group International. New book, The Culture Climb. Her first book, You Are Here. Check them both out. And congratulations again. Thank you for taking the time and really appreciate you sharing your insight and wisdom with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks.